There's a very bright light. Hello friends! Welcome back to the channel. Also welcome back to my floor. Different floor this time, but still. The last books video was on the floor, so we are again on the floor. It's where I do all my best thinking. Before Christmas I did a video about the historical costuming books that I thought were good gifts. And in that video I mentioned that there was a whole bunch of other books that I would like to review but couldn't because I didn't own them. Now I do! So we're doing another review. The first book in today's assortment is actually two books, which is The King's Servants and the Queen's Servants, courtesy of the same people who brought you The Tudor Tailor. I actually received these just before Christmas. The Queen's Servants had been out of print for a while and just come back in, so I got them as a set. I should preface this by saying that I really like these books. There are some drawbacks. One is the price. As you probably have noticed, they are not large books. I'm almost surprised they weren't printed as one. I'm sure there was a reason for that. So for a book of this size, and the fact they're coming from a small press, if you're used to buying your books off Amazon, they're on the pricier side. I absolutely think they're worth it. They are in full colour throughout. A huge amount of work has clearly gone into these. What these books are an examination of the household records from the royal court for a very specific period in time. When they say men's dress and gentlemen's dress at the accession of Henry VIII, so the very beginning of Henry VIII's reign, that is literally what they mean. It's not a big time period that's covered at all. I can see how if you were into Tudor dress, you might find that that was a little bit too specific. It really doesn't give you a lot of information for even 5 years earlier or 5 years later. Having said that, it is super specific, but it's so specific. It's actually really interesting because they don't just look at the clothes, they go into all of the primary evidence, their method for creating these books and the information they've drawn out, and then into great detail about what fabric, what weave, what furs were available, how much everything cost, what a normal wardrobe looked like, what existed but was coming out of fashion, what was new in fashion and where those influences were coming from. I imagine as a historical costumer, the level of detail involved here is perfect. But as someone who is not overly concerned with historical accuracy and just likes making pretty things, I still think they're really valuable. They've both got a whole bunch of patterns. They're really good patterns. I'm really looking forward to scaling some of these up and having a go. I'm really appreciative of the Queen's Servants for the period of history that it covers. I have a great interest in transitional periods in dress, so I feel like oftentimes in historical costuming you'll get people hitting the high notes. Bam, 18th century panniers, bam, Regency period, bam, crinoline, bustle, Edwardian. And they don't really look into the in-between bits. I really like the in-between bits, so I love the 1790s and I love the mantua and I love the elliptical crinoline and all these kind of interstitial fashions as you're moving from one big name style to another. But one of the periods I've always really struggled with, just getting straight in my head, was the transition from medieval, which is very flowing and soft and unstructured, allegedly, to the Tudor period, which is very stiff, very formal, very different. And the period that this book covers is exactly that. And you can see from the garments that are reproduced in it that you are moving from the coat hardy, gothic fitted gown, whatever you want to call it, into the Henrician court gown that we recognise. And I think that's really cool. I really enjoy that. I think that that is a period of history that so far I had struggled to visualise and that hasn't really had very much attention. And there's a whole book on it, which is amazing. Anything else I want to say about this? No, I think it's great. And then on the other side of things, The King's Servants, I was expecting to find not that interesting because people don't tend to put as much attention into menswear as they do into women's wear. It's amazing. It's great. It's got so many different... There are patterns in here for things that I've never seen patterns for before. There's a huge amount of information about, you know, details and finishing. The men's clothing that is covered here is far more sort of uniform than the women's clothing, which is more... The women in these records didn't have jobs in quite the same way as the men of the household did. Instead of being someone's lady-in-waiting, you are a liveryman, a man-at-arms, a clerk, an attendant, a huntsman. You've got a job, which means you have a uniform. I'm really pleased to add this to my library, not only because I can now make early Tudor menswear, which is a bit exciting, it's a bit good, but also because I just really enjoy seeing someone taking as much time and attention over the men's clothing as they traditionally do over the women's clothing. So while The Queen's Servants is a book I'm really, really glad to own, The King's Servants is the standout of the two for me. But really, you should get them as a pair. They're a pair. You should get them as a pair. Next up in my selection of things that I got over Christmas, this time with a specific project in mind, is this. I've owned the American Duchess Guide to 18th Century Dressmaking since it came out. I actually think I got it for Christmas that year. I've used it lots, I really appreciate it. Never picked up this one because, as you can probably tell, I don't really need historical hair care tips. I do need to sort this out though, God. Ugh. But I had a project in mind and I thought it was maybe time that I actually, picked this up. This one is a bit of a mixed bag for me, just because on the one hand, I think it's important to point out that actually quite a lot of the projects in here aren't beauty products, as it were. There's a lot of millinery, there's a lot of headdresses and hats and bonnets and accessories. I don't think I'd appreciated before I actually picked it up, and would maybe have got it sooner if I'd known that this book is actually mostly sewing projects with a selection of cosmetics recipes thrown in. But having got it for the cosmetics recipes, I'm not going to be making any of them. Or, I don't know, I might. It does seem like they've done a really good job of reproducing all these 18th century recipes in a form that we could reasonably reproduce. But the headliner, the pomatum that you use to set your hair with, the baseline for all of your hair care, is made out of animal fats, which, even if I wanted to put animal fat on my hair, which I don't, I can't get that. Maybe it's different in America, but in the UK you can't, especially during a pandemic, you can't just order pig tallow through the post. That's not gonna happen. I realise this is a very niche critique, but I feel like on my first pass through the book I couldn't find anything addressing that aspect. The fact that there isn't a non-animal based substitution, or even really an explanation of why there isn't an animal-based substitution. And I've seen a couple of things online about how that wouldn't work because you're an animal and your hair's animal and therefore you use animal fat. But I use plant-based oils on my hair on an almost daily basis. It works great. And obviously that's not what they would have used in the period, but we don't live in the 18th century, we live now. You can probably expect, because I'm still determined to do this project, even if I don't use the actual recipes from this, I will use the techniques and the hairstyling, and I'm not very good at hairstyling because, well, to do a project later in the summer that I'm really excited for, so you'll probably see much more of this book in future, and I will be experimenting actually accessible versions of some of these recipes. So this review is a bit all over the place. It's a good book. I like it. There is one really obvious gap in it for me. It may be that I've not read it properly and I need to go through in more detail, or indeed it may be that genuinely there isn't a vegetable-based option. But if so, I want to know why, and maybe that is addressed in this book, but I haven't found it on a first pass. So, but having said that, like I said, the actual cosmetic part of this book is quite small compared to the sewing part of the book and the styling part of the book. With the caveat that the cosmetic recipes may not be accessible to you, I think it's probably still worth getting, just that I got it for the cosmetics recipes and then discovered that they were not going to work. Next on the list, and our penultimate entry. Penultimate? Yeah, okay, I'm treating those two as a pair, so we'll call it the penultimate one. Medieval Garments Reconstructed, aka Where Were You? in September of 2019. So this book comes with upsides and downsides. My personal review of this book is that it is exactly what I wanted and everything that I needed. So there's not really any downsides for me. However, as previously stated, I am not a historical costumer. I am a LARPer. So this book gives you the gridded patterns in multiple sizes, which presumably the original garments didn't have. If not all, a representative sample of the Norse finds from Herjolfsnes from the 12th century? Unclear. Solidly medieval one way or another. There are lots and lots of tunics and dresses. There are also some accessories. So hoods, hats, possibly some mittens and stockings. I don't remember. Okay, there are stockings, there are not mittens. I misremembered the mittens. Anyway, if you watch Morgan Donna's reconstruction of one of the garments from this book, you will know that there is a second book, which I believe is called Written in the Earth, which basically gives you all of the construction details. It's going to tell you how these garments were made, what processes were used, what was included. This book is basically just the patterns. As someone who just wants cool shapes to put on their body, this is great. This is exactly what I want. This is all I needed. If you want a lot of information to make a historical reconstruction out of, you need another book as well. But for me personally, this one is perfect. It's such an interesting and different take on medieval clothing. I really like the idea that now if someone's like, your kit brief is medieval, I can go, cool, I'm gonna look exciting instead of just wearing a t-tunic and leggings like everyone else. Because that's how my mind works. I will say that I think this book is beautifully laid out and really clean and elegant, and I think everything's really well explained. There's not a huge amount of information, but for me there's just enough that I'm like, yes, good. I don't feel like I'm ignoring anything, because let's be honest, if there was more information I would be ignoring it, but I feel confident that I'm not going to make a really obvious mistake, which is not a feeling I get when reading Janet Arnold. But there we are. So Medieval Garments Reconstructed is a solid 15 out of 10 from me. Do recommend, and yes, I am now 100% confident that I totally made that 12 gold gown wrong. Not that I wasn't already confident that I'd made that 12 gold gown wrong, but... And finally, my Christmas present to myself, I'd been eyeing up the books from Francis Grimble for quite some time, because it seemed like they covered quite a lot of the Victorian period in quite a lot of detail, but they were also a bit expensive. Because I currently play a game set in loosely the 1880s, and I love me a bustle, I decided that the two bustle fashion books were the best ones for me, and decided to order them. So I have Bustle Fashions 1885 to 1887 and Directoire Revival Fashions 1888 to 1889. When these arrived, I immediately realised why they were the price they were, because they are this big. And now I understand. Now I understand why Francis Grimble's books are so expensive. It's because they're huge. 1885 to 1887 is actually the slightly lighter one. They both start with the same chapters on how to use the patterns, how to scale them up, and they end with the same section on the apportioning rules and that as well. These guys don't use gridded systems or anything like that. They have their own scaling system. I'll be honest, put me off for a long time, but I have now tried it. More on that in a later video. It's not that bad. It's alright. I wouldn't let learning a new system put you off picking up one of these books, not necessarily the 1880s ones, but whatever period you need. Again, more details in a later video, but I've found it really easy and really just given me really good results. Both books come with a variety of patterns in them. I won't say I think they're particularly well organised. Every section you will get an example with a description from an original Victorian fashion magazine, and then the pattern all laid out over the next few pages. And then you will get a couple of pages of other pictures and descriptions that are different, but that you could make using the pattern you've just seen. So when they say 41 patterns, that's actually 41 patterns with multiple different suggested views as you'd get in a commercial pattern. There's obviously little to no construction information. The patterns are pretty good, but they are period. They're not amazing, and when you add in user error from using the apportioning rulers to trace things up and that, I wouldn't recommend these for a beginner or a particularly cautious person of any skill level. You're gonna have to make a lot of stuff up as you go along, or cross-reference a bunch of other books like Victorian Dressmaking Techniques, the one that I reviewed in my last video, which you should go look at. They do include patterns for undergarments, petticoats and shifts, etc. They do not include patterns for corsets or skirt supports, because Victorian times you wouldn't really be making those at home. That was something you bought, particularly in the 1880s when corsets and bustles were being mass produced, and just you'd buy that. They both have a lot of examples of coats and outerwear. The Directoire Revival, this one also has a lot of sporting outfits in it. When I ordered this, I didn't know what the Directoire Revival was. Not really sure what the Directoire style in the first place was. But it turns out it's this style of wearing open-fronted coats over your skirts that are long in the back and short in the front, and doesn't appeal to me at all. Never worn anything like that. Each book also has a big section at the back about trimming and accessories, so it goes into lots of different options. Basically, you've seen the simplest version that these patterns can create. Now here's how to make it peak Victorian. I don't know a better way of explaining it. Oh yes, I almost forgot, this book also includes a whole heap of wrappers and tea gown patterns. I might need another tea gown, you guys. You may notice that this one in particular has a little post-it note in it, because I may have been working on something. You're just going to have to wait and see in another video as to what that might be. Minor spoilers. It's orange. So just a quick video this week after last week's marathon interview with Robin. Those are all the new books that I have and am currently enjoying. And as I said, you can probably expect to see at least some of them making appearances over the next few months as I work on various different things. At some point. Projects. Yes. Thank you all for watching and for all the nice things people have had to say about my Foundations Revealed project. There will be an actual making of, didn't really film it, video about the project itself coming soon as I have the energy, but I'm really pleased with it. I think I did the best I could given shot myself in the foot, and now it takes up so much space in my workroom. You have no idea how huge this thing is. It's unreal. It's YouTube, so usual drill. If you enjoyed this video, maybe you'd like to give it a like. Leave me a comment below to let me know which of these books you'd like to get for yourself. Maybe suggest some other books I haven't talked about that you think would be good additions to my bookshelf. And in the description box you'll find a link to my Ko-fi. Yep, we're calling it Ko-fi today, which is a place you can leave a one-off financial donation to support the channel. With the number of projects that I'm taking on at the moment, it really helps. So if you would like to keep my cat in treats and keep my bookshelf full of every other thing Frances Grimble has ever published, you'll find that link in the description box below. Thank you all so much for watching. I can't wait to see you for the next one, which will hopefully be some more sewing content at last. And I'll catch you next time. There is some seriously manic energy going on in this one. Maybe I should tone it down.